You know, I'm going to go to bat a little bit for the beef industry because I've been in the genetics business for 40 years. It has been hard to individually measure animals for feed. You know, it's been easy to measure output. It's been a lot harder to measure input. I mean, we've done a lot of breed comparisons and closeouts and trying to tell the rest of the world that Limousin are the most efficient, but we're not sure why they're not all listening to us. Thankfully, the crowd is here, and we appreciate that. So what we did in the last year is implemented, we did a search, went looking for ways to measure individual feed intake on our pedigreed animals so we could start building a larger data bank. And the best system we found out there was one called GrowSafe. Comes out of Canada, and we happen to have that system is in our feed yard down in Nebraska where we grow all the yearling bulls, and we'll continue to grow them. And we have Alison Sunstrom, who knows more about collecting feed efficiency data and more about the GrowSafe system than anyone I've ever met. She is the CEO of the GrowSafe company.
Well, I'm really happy. I found out that I'm older than Jerry, and that means that I've got a future at Walmart. So I'm happy about that. I'd like to tell you a little bit about our company. We're a group of engineers, computer and animal scientists, and we don't take ourselves too seriously. We're a bunch of geeks, nerds, and cowboys. And what we've developed is a sophisticated data acquisition platform on which we're building a number of different products for all segments of the beef industry. Now, we laugh a little bit because we seem to have become an overnight success after about 24 years of research. So I was a lot younger when I first started out. Now, our feed intake measurement system that Jerry talks about having in Nebraska, I'm going to give you a little explanation of it, just in case you've never seen it. But essentially, animals are tagged with RFID tags, and we've built each tag, just in case you don't know, has a unique ID. And we built an RFID antenna in a rim of a feeding trough, and each time an animal comes to visit, that trough is suspended on 2 load cells that measures to a 30-gram accuracy. So it measures pretty darn accurate. And the tag and the trough feed disappearance is measured every second. Now, this is a picture of the system over at Sandy Ridge. Data from this system is transmitted about 60 miles to the ranch computer, and software on the computer analyzes the data every day. That computer is plugged into the internet, and each day we calculate an individual intake for each animal. Now, one of the most important things that we do is that we plug this system into the internet, and we have a series of watchdog software routines that pull out to our servers up in Calgary every day. And we probably know within about 15 minutes anywhere in the world where our systems are operating, whether they're working or not. And users cannot amend the data that is collected by our systems. So I don't know if you know, but in the bull industry, sometimes you don't get all the correct data. And so in this system, you're definitely getting accurate data. What goes in the system, so feed supply into the bunks, we measure, and everything that goes out must be attributed to animals, or whatever is left over is something that we account for. Now, we found in the University of Illinois, we have our technology in 6 barns, and in 1 barn, we have 2% of feed disappearance that we can't account for. We found out that that was going to starlings. So in this industry, there's lots of stuff you have to measure, and you don't really think about the things that go wrong. Every day, we compare the weight from each scale, and we compare the data from each animal against one another. We run a pretty extensive statistic process control on all the data. If we see things that we don't understand, we go to good scientists like Matt and others around the country. We have about 29 different scientists that help us with our data. Now, residual feed intake is one of the measurements that's used, and also residual average daily gain. All of those measurements need feed intake. But essentially, we're looking for those animals that eat less than we expect, and those animals that eat more than we expect, we'd like to see them removed. And as Matt said, RFI is a moderately heritable trait, And for these measurements, we must measure both intake and growth. And what we've learned so far in general, and Matt covered that much better than I can, that selection for residual feed intake reduces feed intake by about 12%. There's a corresponding reduction in methane. Animals that eat less also produce less methane. Now we're seeing on average at $4 corn that over a 120-day period in the feedlot, we can save about $80 per animal. So fairly significant savings. Now, forgive me, but I've got to show you data. If you're a nerd, you've got to look at data. So what I'm showing you here, and you don't have to concentrate on it too much, but what you're looking at here is the disappearance of feed from one trough. Each little color dot that I put there is 1 second of data collected by our system. Each color dot represents an animal. So you see that red animal, the blue animal that I've circled, and that black line you see is the feed disappearance from the trough when an animal is eating. Now what we found is that our systems are actually creating something almost like a fingerprint. We see a digital feeding signature, an individual signature for every animal. And if you quickly take a look at this data, so remember you're looking at 1 second of data, that black spike you see is actually the force that the animal is exerting on the load cell. And we're seeing a whole bunch of different patterns. And what we built in our system is really just cowboy logic. And you can probably tell me what you're looking at there. That blue animal is a very aggressive animal. When he comes to eat, he's really pushing on that load cell. You see that little yellow animal? He's deking in and out between that other blue animal, and he's having a little trouble getting up on feed. So we see a lot of things in this data that you would look at. Now this is a really ugly graph, and it's the ugly graph because I own the cattle that are in this pen. And I am not the smartest cattle person. I might be okay as a geek, but I'll tell you, I'm not the smartest cattle person on picking it. But I'm going to tell you that when you feed out cattle, this is the kind of result that you'll have. I had 256 animals in this pen. About 40 I excluded from this graph because they were sick or mortalities. And what you see in this graph, and what you're looking at is net income per head, what I made on these cattle, and the number of animals in each bar. And if you take a look, you'll see that I lost about $320 on one animal, and I gained about $168 on only one. And I lost on 97 of those animals, and I made a little bit on 119. If I put the sick animals and I put the deads in that graph, I lost money. So as Jerry said, and Dr. Spangler said, we have a wide variation in cattle. Now another system that we've installed at Wulf Cattle, and we don't have a lot of these around the country yet, but you're going to start seeing them come up, is a system that we put in the feedlot pen. And data is acquired when animals drink. It's non-invasive. RFID and data from multiple biometric and environmental sensors are collected. Now, why we developed this technology, and as everybody knows, traditional marketing of cattle in this industry is done by eyeball. And we got some really good cowboys, but they're disappearing. And so we're pulling sick cattle, and we're pulling cattle ready for market only by eyeball. Now, I'll tell you how the system works. It's a little bit of Inspector Gadget stuff, but it's working well in the feed yard already. But as the animal comes to drink, we're taking a partial body weight. We don't have a load cell in the base of the scale. It's actually suspended. And our conversion from partial to live weight is highly accurate. Here's a little factor. When we measure partial body weight, we're almost measuring hog carcass weight. Some changes between different breed type, but that partial body weight is almost equal to pay weight. We also measure individual animal water intake by individual sinks. And each day we report to the feed yard a daily weight and growth statistics. We accurately forecast future feed intake and weight. And we digitally profile animal health. And we've learned that we are about 4 days in advance of visual symptom expression, about 24 hours in advance of body temperature change, and we're also determining the optimal market time when cost of gain begins to exceed the value of gain. Now, to pull cattle from a pen of 450 head is really tough. You can't run in there and grab that little ear tag out, so we had to do something. We had to figure out a way to pull sick cattle. So we tried blinking LED lights. That doesn't work. As soon as you get a little manure on there, it doesn't blink anymore. And what we also did is we tried a number of things. So what we came up with is we actually had to collect the data that came from the system, analyze it in real time, send a trigger back to the unit. That takes an awful lot of technology, bidirectional communication, and a number of other things. So what we did is we came up with a spray paint methodology. So we spray paint sick cattle as soon as we identify them, or we spray paint them when they're market ready. And we had to do a few things, because the first place we sprayed cattle was in Hale, Texas, and the day we chose, semis were being blown off of the highway. We were spraying cattle 4 pens down. So what we had to do was we had to start measuring wind speed, temperature, humidity, and a number of other factors. When we had all of that, we realized that we had a methodology that we could actually get someday to the point of individually treating animals in the pen. We're there today. We can treat animals with up to 4 substances. Now, the thing is, we have no products yet that can be delivered in this manner. So we're working with pharma companies and others to figure out how can we deliver this kind of technology. So what we have here is an unprecedented ability in real time to continuously and automatically track animals, to identify disease before symptom expression, measure and predict future gain in market value, and treat animals without human intervention. Now, what does this mean for the future? It means that we might be able to select animals on optimal market endpoint, maybe their behavior, their adaptation, disease resistance. It's an open ball game. I thought I'd show you a little data again. Remember, I'm a geek. And each bar that you're looking at here, you're looking at one animal. Each bar that you see, that gray bar, is 1 day of feed intake data. The blue dot is 1 day of water intake, and the red line is the growth that we're measuring for that animal in the feed yard. Take a look at how the growth is curving off, and that red dot indicates where the animal died in the pen. Now, if you take a look at that graph, you see that we probably had about 16 days of changes in behavior, loss of weight, water intake changes, and behavior changes. I thought you might just like to take a look at that. Another example of an animal that we actually pulled with bloat. We euthanized this animal, but it shows you that we can't always see things that are happening in animals. Now, finally, I just want to briefly say that one of the biggest things that we're trying to pursue is measuring feed intake on pasture. It's great to measure in the feedlot, but you also have to get out on pasture. And if you're not familiar with the Noble Foundation, we're very proud, alongside all the different researchers we collaborate with, we have a master research agreement to look at just that. We're looking at dry matter to water intake correlations, forage stocking rates, and heifer residual feed intake effects. And I think the most stunning thing that we've seen, and this just shows you what we've looked at with cattle on pasture, the most stunning thing that we've seen is the animal response tells us as much about the pasture as it does about the animal itself.